I believe that it is actually the ultra-liberal, degenerate societies that give birth to fascism. This is what I believe. I believe that it is the degenerate societies that eventually give birth to the ultra right wing fascistic societies. I believe that it is the liberal or libertine degenerate societies, debased and amoral societies, that eventually give birth to the most conservative slash restrictive slash conservatively tyrannical or far right tyrannical societies. Now, why do I say this? Because right wing ideology, be it fascism or Nazism, historically speaking, were always reactionary. And what do I mean by reactionary? By reactionary, I mean that they were reactions. Like what is reactionary politics? It's a reaction to something. It's a reaction to a problem. And so when an organization is reactionary, or when, let's say, a cult or some kind of a group is reactionary, what that means is that their whole existence is a reaction to something. Their whole existence is presenting themselves as a solution to a problem, whatever that problem may be. And so when you have liberalism or leftism, whatever you want to call it, progressivism, that comes with a lot of problems. It comes with increasing the crime rate. So you go to a state like California or New Mexico or Illinois, Chicago specifically, a lot of crime in these areas. Lots of crime. Why? Because there's too much leniency on criminals. And what El Salvador has taught us is that when you are harsh on criminals, the crime rate goes down. But liberals are very fixated on being fair to everyone, or to being fair with criminals. And so you have crime rates go up, you have degeneracy, and society may accept this for a significant amount of time, but there will always eventually be a reaction that seeks to get rid of the libertineness or seeks to get rid of the lawlessness, but ends up killing the guilty and the innocent alike. And that's the problem with these sorts of reactionary groups. You could have a more moderate reaction to lawlessness, like what we saw in El Salvador, and that's totally fine. I'm definitely a believer on being harsh on crime. But usually, when you have lawlessness being done by one group, it leads to a violent reaction by another group. And that violent reaction will say things that are true to justify its existence and to justify what it's doing, but too many times these groups will impose solutions or policies that are downright murderous. And I don't have to give you guys the examples. You guys know the examples, right? Nazism is an example of that. So the Weimar Republic was very libertine, and in some ways it was lawless. And what that eventually led to was the reactionary Nazi movement that eventually took over. And that's the reality. So if you have a society, and that's the thing, I believe that being harsh on criminals from the beginning is the greatest thing that you can do to prevent right-wing reactionary politics. That's what I believe. I think that if you want to truly prevent another Hitler or another Mussolini, you have to be harsh on the criminals. There is an old Chinese proverb, I think it was from Lao Tzu, and it says that if you remove all wrongdoing, evil has no justification to exist. This is essentially what the Chinese philosopher said. That all evil justifies its existence by pointing to wrongdoing. And we see this throughout history, right? King David did not punish his son who was a rapist, and so the other son, Absalom, comes out and says, I'm gonna replace my father. And Absalom was evil, but he pointed to a real fact about his father, King David, about the wrongdoing of his father. And then you go to the Nazis, and the Nazis presented themselves as the solution to the communist problem. And so the Nazis presenting themselves as the solution gained popularity. The Nazis were a reaction. The Italian fascist, the Mussolini, was a reaction to what? The rise of Marxism in Italy. And what was happening was Marxist politics was growing very popular in Italy, and the landowners in Italy were worried that the Marxists were going to do policies that would restrict their businesses. And so they voted for Mussolini. Mussolini was a reaction. Now, there has been a racist backlash in the Western world. This backlash is being done as a reaction to what? High crime rates, be it high crime rates from certain people in Germany or high crime rates being done by particular African-American gangs in the United States. Regardless of the place, there has been a backlash. That backlash is being condemned by the left. And the left are right in what they say about the dangers of the backlash, but at the same time, that backlash could have been prevented if criminals were harshly punished initially. So, for example, I saw this video from Chicago where a Somalian girl takes her aunt's car and starts driving like a madwoman, and a police officer is pursuing her. And as she's driving, she is literally driving over people's front yards. She's just driving over people's front yards, damaging people's property. She gets arrested, and then what does the judge say? What does the court say? Well, the court concludes that all she deserves is, I think it was 2 days in probation. That's it. 2 days. For breaking the law, for doing a severe crime. Running away from police, driving away from police, driving recklessly, putting people in danger, driving over people's yards, destroying people's property. 2 days in probation. That's it. You see this thing in the UK where you'll see these stories where you have Pakistanis who do terrible crimes, crimes of a sexual nature, deviant nature, I should say. And they raped some people or something like that. And then they'll say, oh, well, you're going to be sentenced to this much time in prison, but your sentence gets suspended. And you see this too many times in the UK. And to be fair, it's not just done with Pakistani gangs. It's also done with white criminals as well. I've done the research and I've seen this sort of leniency being done on white criminals as well in the UK. So the problem with the UK, the problem with much of the Western world is that there is way too much leniency on crime, way too much leniency on criminals. And and what happens is, if it goes on long enough, eventually there is a reaction. You cannot allow criminals to impose their will on society long enough without getting a right wing or without getting a societal backlash against it. Sometimes the backlash can be beneficial, like in the case with El Salvador, but sometimes the backlash can be very dangerous. And the backlash can be worse than what the backlash was responding to. That's the case with Nazism. That's the case with Nazism. I'll just leave it at that. So this is how things work. So if you don't deal with a problem initially, you're gonna have a backlash, and the backlash can be worse than the initial problem. So the thing is that if you don't deal with crime, you get a racist backlash. So the majority of black people are not criminals. The problem is you have criminal behavior being done by a number of them, and it gets too rampant to the point where people say, this is how black people are. And they're wrong to say that, but that's the conclusion that a lot of people come to. This is how black people are. And you have these political opportunists who see this sort of anger and they see this sort of situation, and what do? They pour gasoline on the flames, and they fan the flames and make the situation even worse. And they rile people up, and they cause way more problems. And they inspire racism. If those criminals were dealt with swiftly, harshly, to the point where they wouldn't be allowed back into society and people would be safer, then we could say, okay, crime has gone down. Yeah, there's black folks here. They're not doing anything because they're not the criminals. They're not criminals. They're just regular people. And the criminals who were here, they're gone. And there wouldn't be room for opportunity for racist provocateurs. So libertinous or liberal or left-wing leniency on crime will always lead to a backlash. And many times they will lead to a racist backlash. So if I was an evil genius and I wanted to see a resurgence in racism, the last thing I would do is give money to a political campaign for a KKK member. My main strategy initially would be to fund and to finance the political campaigns of light on crime progressives. I would just fund the progressives, enable them to rule over a country or over a state or a city, have them rule for however long it takes to get the backlash, and I'll just have them rule. And because eventually, because I would know that eventually there's going to be a backlash. And then when the backlash comes, I would just finance the backlash. And I would have those people rule, and we have a resurgence in racism that's established itself in the society, and I got what I wanted. That's if I was an evil genius, which I'm not. But if I was an evil genius, that's what I would do. So if you want to see racism get revived, just have liberals rule, and eventually racism will be revived. Weimar Republic. You had these liberals ruling over Germany, and you had so much degeneracy, and you had all this crime that was happening in Germany. Boom, you had a backlash, and that backlash was Adolf Hitler. It's as simple as that. People played their hand too long, thinking that people are too stupid to figure out that there is a serious problem, and people play their hand so long that eventually you have a backlash, and that's the problem. Because the pendulum will eventually swing. Yeah, exactly. So if you have a society that's just saturated with crime, pornography, saturated with just degeneracy and laziness, something happens in the human spirit that says, okay, we can't be doing this anymore. Just as human beings hit rock bottom, societies will eventually hit rock bottom. And when they hit rock bottom, they're on a fork on the road where they have to make a choice. Do they continue the way they're going? Or do they make a change? And then when they decide to make a change, then there's another fork on the road. Do they enable a backlash that is dangerous and destructive? Or do they take a balanced approach to the problem and say, let's get rid of the criminals, let's put away the degeneracy, and let's not go after innocent people? That's the decision. The Germans, they chose the former of the two. And I'm afraid that because humanity doesn't really have a lot of guidance, that too many people are going to choose that option of being destructive and being violent and being Darwinian. And when you see people saying, listen, we're tired of the crime, we just want to get rid of it. Okay, that's balanced. But when you have people saying the reason why we have all this crime is because of a genetic makeup of a certain race, and we have to go back to Darwin, and let's wave some flags, and let's have a tiki torch rally at night, and let's praise Adolf Hitler, that's when you're getting into very scary territory. El Salvador is giving the finger to Western detractors criticizing Bukele. Yeah, and F those people, right? Because El Salvador was the murder capital of the world at one point in time. It was the crime scene of the earth, and it was a terrible place to live. I mean, it was an unlivable country. You could not really live in El Salvador comfortably. It was impossible. And you had people who couldn't live their normal lives. Their neighborhoods were controlled by gangs. The gangs imposed curfews on people. The gangs would, if you parked your car in the wrong place, they would just take your car and then charge you a whole bunch of money. If you wanted your car back, if you couldn't pay the money, they would just steal your car. They had torture chambers. I mean, it was pretty demonic stuff what was happening in El Salvador. And thankfully, a Palestinian dude named Bukele took over the country and just started doing what needed to be done. And he started doing exactly what you have to do to get rid of crime, which is you impose harsh laws on crime. Who would have thought that that's actually the solution? Not bullshit solutions of just wasting money bullshit policies of just wasting money and pouring a bunch of money into some bullshit like, oh, mental health. Oh, because the reason why you have crime is because of mental health. That's the reason why. And the reason why you have crime is because of poverty. And you're literally listening to the criminals, the apologists for the criminals, and you're doing what they want. You're listening to the apologetics of crime. The apologetics of crime is do you know what the apologetics of crime is? A complete absence of accountability. And this is the oldest sin in the world, because you go back to Adam and Eve ate the fruit, and then God confronts them, and what happens? Adam says, it's the woman, and the woman says, nah, it's the snake. And so we have no accountability. And so when we take away accountability, we have lawlessness. This is what happens. So you have the apologetics of crime. You have your Roland Martins, and you have your, your Mark Lamont Hills, and you have your Rashad, whatever his name is, right? You have these types of people, and they are the apologists for crime. And they want to make excuses for crime. And they want to foment hatred against the police. This is what these people do. And this is what creates lawlessness. And these are people who supposedly want to go against racism, but all they're doing is creating the perfect environment for racism. Because if you have too much crime, and it just so happens that a good proportion of those crimes are being done by one particular race of people, guess what's going to happen? People are going to start hating that race. And then you have racism. I don't want racism. I don't want Nazism. So my belief is to destroy the wrongdoing that evil uses to justify its existence.